Majority Leader of the House.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. On Monday, Mr. Speaker, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 for morning hour and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 9 for legislative business. The House will consider an omnibus appropriations package, so the House and Senate can both pass it before March 11th. As the minority whip knows, as the Republican whip knows, on March 11th at 12 o'clock, if we have not passed additional authorization for funding of government will shut down. So it is imperative that we act. In light of the fact that we will be, many of us on the Democratic side of the aisle will be going to Philadelphia for our legislative retreat on the Wednesday preceding March 11th, the 9th. We need to act by that time and send something to the Senate. I hope we can do that. The House will also consider H-Con Res. 70, condemning threats of violence against historically black colleges and universities, too many of which we've seen in recent weeks, and reaffirming support of HBCUs and their students introduced by Representative Alma Adams, and that will be considered under suspension of the rules. The House will also consider other bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. Additional legislative items are, of course, possible, and I want to say that clearly one of the principal focuses that we have is the onslaught and criminal behavior led by Vladimir Putin, which is occurring in Ukraine. The President spoke to the country and to us on Tuesday in a State of the Union message, in which he made it clear that we need to be unified. And in fact, we passed a resolution in which, for the most part, save 3 of our members, we were unified. And I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that we would remain unified in the face of what is the breaking of international law and could be called a genocide of the Ukrainian people by Vladimir Putin. I'm hopeful that we will remain unified and focused on that issue as we proceed, and I yield back to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and share the gentleman's expression of unified support with the people of Ukraine. Clearly, we stand with the heroic people of Ukraine, President Zelensky, the inspiration he's been showing to the world, and the strong people of Ukraine. What we're seeing from Russia is barbaric. One of my colleagues, Representative Spar, who actually was born in Ukraine, she's been very outspoken about the genocide that's happening to the people of Ukraine. As the gentleman mentioned, the resolution that we passed with Mr. Meeks and Ms. Sparks, bipartisan, overwhelming vote of support standing with the people of Ukraine. Clearly, they've asked for a number of very specific things, some military equipment, supplies, as well as humanitarian relief, and we need to continue to push as hard as we can to make sure it's delivered as expeditiously as possible as we watch continuous barbaric attacks, raids, bombing, carpet bombing, cluster bombs, things that are illegal under international law, yet Putin continues to commit these barbaric crimes against the people of Ukraine. They're tough people, and they're not going to give up their country, and we need to do everything we can to help them. One other thing that was mentioned in this resolution, because people obviously want to know what can we do, and there are a number of steps that are being taken. There are other steps that we would also like to see this Congress take. In the resolution, there were 2 provisions specifically that I wanted to bring up. One of the resolution requests was that we pledge, the United States Congress pledge support working with Europe and international partners to bolster Europe's energy security and reduce its dependence on Russian energy imports. The resolution that we passed also goes on to say, we resolve that we underscore the importance of maintaining United States energy independence for the benefit of the American people and United States allies. And with that, there was a piece of legislation that was just filed earlier this week to do just that. It's H.R. 6858 by Ms. McMorris Rogers and Mr. Westerman, the ranking members of the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Natural Resources Committee, to really go into the heart of what we can do as a country and as a Congress to take leverage away from Vladimir Putin as it relates to energy. I think we can all see over the years how Europe has become very dependent on Russian energy, unfortunately getting over 40% of their oil from Russia. This is also putting billions of dollars in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. And when you look at the price of oil today, over $110 a barrel, if you just look at the daily benefit that that gives to Vladimir Putin, he's making over $700 million every single day selling oil to the United States and Europe. Think about that. Vladimir Putin is pocketing today over $700 million, and he's going to get another $700 million tomorrow and another the day after by selling his oil to the United States and to Europe. There are things we can do to stop that. And that's what H.R. 6858 really goes to the heart of. And some of those things that are very specific. President Biden, just a few weeks ago, put a complete freeze on all oil and gas projects in America, all oil and gas projects. That means we are not allowing the United States to provide for the resources of our country and our allies. As we used to be exporting oil to our allies around the world, it's becoming harder to do that because those policies by President Biden are shutting off American energy. At the same time, President Biden was asking Vladimir Putin to produce more oil for us. There's no reason we should be asking Russia to do what we in America can do, yet that is a policy that was put in place. President Biden can reverse that today. I've called on President Biden to reverse all of these specific actions today, but this legislation would at least show that Congress is ready to allow ourselves to be energy independent so that we can take that leverage away from Putin. We can take that $700 million a day away from Putin. Obviously, there are a number of other things, just permits for things like LNG. Natural gas, Putin is supplying a tremendous amount of natural gas to Europe. There are 6 projects right now sitting on the Biden administration's desk to approve LNG permit applications for major projects, multi-billion-dollar, private sector-funded projects in America to allow us to ship natural gas to our European allies so they don't need to get it from Putin. Not one of those permits has been approved in over a year. Same thing, permits for pipelines. It's not just the Keystone Pipeline. There are many other pipeline projects, including 2 states in the Northeast. The United States, states like Massachusetts, are importing their oil from Vladimir Putin because they can't get it through pipelines in America. This opens that up. It does a number of other things to allow America to become energy independent, but more importantly, to take the leverage away from Vladimir Putin that he has today, that he's using to pocket over $700 million a day by selling his energy to us in Europe. I would love to see that bill on the floor, and I think a lot of other people would too, to send a message to Putin that we're not going to be a part of helping him finance this barbaric war on Ukraine. And so I would ask the gentleman if we could look at bringing H.R. 6858 to the floor, have a full debate, pass a strong piece of legislation that would send a signal to our friends around the world, surely to the people of Ukraine, but also to Vladimir Putin, that he's not going to be able to finance his war off the backs of oil he's selling to the United States and Europe and using that against the people of Ukraine. I would yield to the gentleman.
As I said, I hope we can be unified and seek to pursue that which unifies us. If we did everything that the gentleman suggests is in that bill, it would not make an immediate difference. The gentleman knows that. The gentleman knows that there are literally millions of acres available for additional pumping oil rigs to be rayed, both offshore and onshore. The gentleman knows we just released 300 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
30 million, I believe it is.
Excuse me, 30 million. So that this administration has taken actions immediately to assist the Europeans. In addition, of course, the Europeans have done something. As the gentleman knows, in terms of reliance, the Germans, in a very difficult political decision for them, has canceled any further actions dealing with the receiving energy through a pipeline in Germany known as Nord Stream 2. He knows further that there is consideration to reactivate or to not decommission nuclear plants, which provide not only clean energy, but abundant energy. In my part of the world, in the Southern Maryland district that I represent, we have a nuclear power plant that produces clean energy for us in abundance. So I would urge the gentleman, very frankly, I've heard this argument when we had recession. I've heard this argument when we had stock market go down, the stock market go up. We're producing more energy than any other country on earth right now. We are exporting energy right now. Now, the issue as to whether or not we have a relatively small sector, but the gentleman's correct, receiving oil, some jurisdictions, from Russia, as to whether we ought to continue that, I think that's a valid argument. We ought to pursue it. But I want to say to the gentleman, very, very frankly, that we need to be focused on what we have done and what we are doing. NATO is unified. And NATO is taking unified action. All the nations of NATO are taking actions, both with respect to stopping any benefits to Russia, which may facilitate the funding of their operations. We have taken very, very substantial sanctions, as you know. We've cut off the Russian central bank, which freezes Putin's strategic reserve funds. He had $600 billion that he was relying on, he called a war fund. We've imposed full sanction on Russia's other major financial institutions, state-owned enterprise critical to its economy. We've removed Russian banks from SWIFT, an action that nobody thought the Europeans would join us in, but they have. We've secured new export controls to cut off Russia's access to tech inputs, including microchips. We've frozen the assets of Putin and oligarchs close to him and launched a task force to hunt down and freeze more of their wealth. We've stopped the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that I talked about, which would have made Germany and some of Europe even more dependent on energy from Russia. Again, some months ago, nobody would have thought that was possible. President Biden has achieved that. We've done $1 billion in security assistance to Ukraine over the past year, a massive increase over past administrations, and has also announced a $1 billion sovereign loan guarantee to shore up Ukraine's economy. Now, America essentially is energy independent. As I said, we're exporting energy. If we didn't export energy, we may be fully independent. Having said that, the gentleman comes from an area of the country that refines some of the kind of oil we get from Russia, heavy crude, as the gentleman knows much better than I do because he's very, very familiar with that industry. Energy is important. We believe as well that assuring energy that is not damaging to our global health is also important. I would be for not buying any oil from Russia. And then what would happen is, and may happen yet, is the price of oil would go up. The gentleman knows that. And then the gentleman would rise and say to me, how can you possibly allow prices to be where they are? I want to honestly tell the American people, we are not sending troops. We will not have people on the front lines. But we will pay a cost to take the actions that the President has courageously taken and that President Zelensky has courageously taken to defend Ukraine's freedom. We'll pay a cost. So the President's trying to balance that with doing what needs to be done. I frankly think he is doing what needs to be done, and I am very proud of the fact that, as I said yesterday, we joined together in a bipartisan way to support the Ukrainian people. We have differences of opinion on energy policy. For the most part, I think many of your members don't believe in global warming is the threat that we believe it is on this side of the aisle. So we have differences of agreement on energy. But what we don't have differences of opinion on, I hope, is that we ought to decrease to the extent we possibly can any economic benefits to Putin. Not the Russian people, but to Putin and the war machine that he has put in place. And as you and I have agreed, he's killing Ukrainians. Unprovoked, unjustified, illegal under international law. And so that's the real issue that we ought to be focused on. And yes, we ought to continue to have a fulsome debate on energy policy. Very, very important. But I will tell the gentleman, as I said before, there are millions of acres, millions, currently available to produce more energy in this country. The gentleman's party was in charge for a long period of time, both the House, the Senate, and the presidency under President Trump. And essentially, the policies that the gentleman, I don't know all the policies in that bill, obviously I haven't read that bill, could have been affected during that period of time. So, bottom line is, the gentleman's correct. We need to make sure that Putin pays a horrific price and that we substantially reduce the resources he has available to perpetrate this international crime. And in the process, we ought to remember that this Congress appropriated over $400 million some years ago to help Ukraine. And President Trump held that money hostage, urging Mr. Zelensky to see if he could get dirt on President Biden. President Trump has recently said how brilliant he thinks Mr. Putin is, and that our president is dumb. That doesn't reflect unity. That doesn't reflect a country that is together to confront an enemy. That undermines our democracy. Mr. Pompeo has also said he thinks Putin is brilliant. I think Putin is an international criminal. I think Putin is what he was grown up to be. He says he's very shrewd, very capable. There are many dictators and tyrants of the world that you could say that about. He didn't say he was a criminal. I'm talking about Pompeo and Trump, or that he was committing a genocide, as you and I have said. Those were not words that either the former Secretary of State or the former President of the United States used just recently after the invasion. So I would say to my friend, very sincerely, we have differences of views on energy. We don't have difference of views, however, on diminishing very radically any resources which Putin could rely on to perpetrate his unjustified and criminal invasion of a sovereign country who has shown no threat to Russia or the Russian people. But at some point in time, we'll continue this argument about drilling and production of more oil. But we will continue, I think, to try to be unified on the issue at hand. And America's unity expressed to the rest of the world will give the Ukrainians, I think, more confidence, give NATO more confidence. And I might say that when I mentioned that NATO has taken extraordinary steps, President Biden, unlike his predecessor, created respect and unity among the NATO allies. Germany, in particular, on Nord Stream 2. The former president uniformly demeaned Ms. Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, and our relations with Germany were very strained. President Biden has put those together, critically important in facing Putin down at this point in time. As General Milley said in our briefing, this was not classified, he said he thought that Russia was going to lose in the end, or at least Putin was going to lose. The Russian people don't want this war. The Russian people do not feel threatened by Ukraine. Putin wants to create empire. And that is what I think we ought to stay focused on and unified on. And we will debate energy policy. But let us not deceive the American public that any policies of this administration have undermined the ability to drill and produce additional energy on those millions of acres that are available on public lands and in public waters right now. Right now. I yield back.
Well, thank the gentleman for yielding. And there are many areas that we have been unified in our response to Ukraine, but it is not unifying to say leave Russia's oil off the table in terms of sanctions. That was left out by President Biden. When he issued sanctions, he specifically exempted Russia's oil, and it is not unifying. There are a lot of people that are angry about that because we're watching the amount of money that Putin is putting in his pocket every day, and he's using that money. Okay, so you take other sanctions, you take other things off the table. The banking system might be hit hard, except if he's able to put $700 million, and it's probably closer to $1 billion a day now with this higher price of oil because of what he's done and what our country has done to take energy off the table.
Will my friend yield just so I can clarify?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. I do not believe energy ought to be taken off the table. I want to assure my friend that is not my position, nor is it our collective position as a party. I understand what the gentleman said. I agree with the gentleman that to the extent that we can decrease underline any resources available to Putin and his war machine, we ought to do it.
And I appreciate that clarification because it is in President Biden's set of sanctions that he specifically exempted energy. Clearly, that's not unifying even to us, but it's the money that is still allowed to be flowing into Russia, to Putin's pocket, to finance the war that many of us want to get at. And if H.R. 6858, after the gentleman looks at it, has some provisions that we could work on, I think it would be very unifying to the country to say we're finally going to confront what might be Vladimir Putin's largest source of funding, and that is his oil exports to the United States, which offends many, many people that today we're getting over 100,000 barrels every single day from Russia because we took things like the Keystone Pipeline off the table. That would have brought us oil from Canada. Canada's a friend, by the way. And it's not like the need and the demand just went away. The demand's still there. So President Biden said, no, we don't want Canadian oil. But it wasn't because he didn't want any oil. He didn't say, no, we don't want any pipelines. He just said no to the Canadian to America pipeline. But he said yes to the Nord Stream 2 initially. But he also said to Vladimir Putin, would you produce more oil? And let's keep in mind, I know there's this conversation about the planet. Let's be honest about carbon emissions. Carbon is emitted all around the globe. And so if we shut down production in America, which has been done, and it's not just on federal lands where the president is not issuing permits, he put a freeze just 2 weeks ago on all new permits, but it's also the banking system that he's using to go after oil and gas companies. So there's no investment being made in America. They're making investment, billions of dollars of investment in other countries. They're just not making it here in America because of those policies. And again, that just gives more leverage to Putin. We were paying less than $2 a gallon under President Trump. I know the gentleman wanted to bring up President Trump. President Trump stood up to Putin, by the way. You didn't see an invasion anywhere in Ukraine under President Trump. You surely did under President Obama and Vice President Biden when Putin walked in and took Crimea with no consequence. Afghanistan, the weakness that was showed, clearly was being watched by Putin and Xi and other adversaries as a preface to then go and start marshaling troops on the Ukraine border. President Trump didn't let that happen. He stood up to Putin and pushed back on Putin. And he also used energy as a weapon against our enemies because we were producing enough to not only meet our needs, but to export to our friends around the world. Surely lowered price and was a benefit to Americans, but it also helped our allies around the world. That's been taken off the table. But let's talk about the carbon emission side, because oil's being produced. It's just that a lot of it isn't being produced here that would otherwise be in the mix. So if you look at, for example, Russian oil, Russia emits probably 40% more carbon to make the same oil that otherwise would be made in the United States because we have better standards in America. I know a lot of people love beating up on America. We do it better than anybody else. Our technology is better than anybody else. In fact, our technology for producing energy is the envy of the world. It should be the model for the world, because if we're not making it, Russia's going to be making it. And believe me, futures prices of oil have an impact on price today, which is why when President Biden walked in and shut the spigots off in America, sure, there's production going on from previous leases that happened under previous administrations, including President Trump, that was driving the price down. But when he walked in day one and said no to Keystone Pipeline, in other words, no to Canada's oil, but yes to Russia's oil, that had an impact on price. When he said no to federal drilling, which then he expanded to all drilling, any new permits. Sure, the stuff that's going on out there is still going on, but there's no new investment being made in America. It's being made in other countries, including Russia, including OPEC nations. And because of that, they're able to control the price because they're cartels. We had literally taken the monopoly away from OPEC in Russia when we were producing enough and using the resources of this great nation, by the way, in a much more energy efficient way than anywhere else in the world. We were reducing carbon emissions in America while producing our own energy, while manufacturing more in America. And the more things are shut down here, they're being made in other places. And those other places emit more carbon. China's building a coal plant probably every single week. China emits more carbon, probably 5 times more carbon, to make many of the same things that we make in America. And so the less we make here, it's still being made. Just being made in other countries. They get the jobs, but they also emit more carbon. And so as people talk about carbon emissions, don't leave that point out because it's an important point. Again, it was President Biden himself who asked Putin to produce more oil just last year. And the oil produced in Russia has a higher carbon price than made here in America. And it makes us less secure. It makes Putin more strong. It gives him hundreds of millions of dollars a day that we can take off the table. I think that would be very unifying if we had that debate and said, can we get an agreement on some of these provisions that would actually strengthen our country? You know, even if Russia wasn't invading Ukraine, it would be smart American policy. It would reduce carbon emissions, but especially considering what's going on in Russia. This is much more pertinent today to have this discussion. And again, I think it can be unifying. Just because right now we might not see eye to eye, I think there's a way to see eye to eye on this if we actually had that debate and looked at it from a global perspective, not just in a silo in America, because again, there's a global market for oil. Carbon emissions are global. And the countries that are taking the things away that we're shutting down here in America emit more carbon. It's a fact. Why shouldn't we be talking about that too? And frankly, taking away the leverage that Putin would have. I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. First of all, the Speaker just announced minutes ago she is opposed to importing any oil from Russia. So the comment I just made to you, if you are trying to project that we want to see Russia advantaged by any expenditures we have on imports, now the Speaker has said exactly what I just said. We're not for that, okay? There are 26 million acres right now available, unaffected, as I understand it, by any of the constraints that you have talked about, available for additional drilling. There are 11 million acres, that's 37 million acres currently available for production of additional product in the United States of America right now. So that the red herring of somehow Trump is President Biden is constraining the production of oil in this country, as I understand it. You're much more aware of this because you come from a producing state and obviously are focused on this. But the fact of the matter is, I am told that these 37 million acres are unaffected and are ready for production right now. Now, the debate we have, Mr. Whip, is about what kind of fuels we ought to be using. You talked a lot about carbon emission. Scientists tell us that carbon emission is a danger. As a matter of fact, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, testified when asked what is the greatest threat to America's security. I think it was last year, it may have been the year before that, said global warming. That's what they said. Now, right now, we have an immediate challenge. And nothing you suggest will affect that immediate challenge. Beyond the Speaker and I both telling you we agree, and I hope the President pursues this, no money to Russia. Period. No buying of Russian products. Now, the gentleman mentions that, he urged Russia to produce more energy last year. Why did he urge that? He urged all OPEC nations to produce more energy. Why? Because he did not want Americans to pay more at the pump. I think that's a policy you probably support, trying to keep prices down. When you constrain with the oil cartel, when you constrain supply, what happens? Demand doesn't diminish because people got to drive to work, they got to get their kids to school, they got to get home. Demand stays steady, and what happens inevitably when supply is constrained and demand stays where it is or goes up? Prices rise. And yes, you're right. The President stands accused of trying to get more supply on the market to bring prices at the pump down. But we do have a fundamental disagreement, and frankly, we ought not to be talking about it now. We had an energy bill that most of your side did not vote for. We get that. There is a legitimate difference of opinion of where we ought to invest our dollars. And we believe we ought to invest our dollars in renewable energy that will be there for some time and does not pollute our air, increase our heat, and make our storms worse for the safety of our globe and our people for decades and centuries to come. But we do agree that we want to stop Putin. Now, the reason I pointed out Trump, because Trump didn't stop Putin. He regaled Putin. He's my friend. I know him. We can get together. Putin's a thug. He's a criminal thug. He's an international criminal. And I think we all agree on that. And it doesn't help for the President of the United States to tell the world, the former President of the United States, to tell the world, I think their guy, this criminal, this thug, is smart, or in Pompeo's word, brilliant, and our guy's dumb. Our guy's not dumb. He's very smart. I've known him for 50 years. He may disagree on policy, but that is not because he's dumb, because he has a different perspective. And very frankly, he's not withholding money from Zelensky. He's making sure Zelensky gets money. Trump tried to hold hostage money for Ukrainian security that we appropriated because we wanted early on to make sure that Zelensky had and the Ukrainian people had the resources they needed. And Mr. Trump withheld them. Now, ultimately, he paid them out after it was disclosed. So we're going to continue a different energy policy, but don't let's mislead the American people. When you have 37 million acres available for additional production, unaffected by the restraints that you talk about, he's talking about new stuff. So, my friend, let's focus in this instance, at this time of crisis, on how we can make sure that America is perceived as unified and of one mind, as we did right after 9/11, and as we did yesterday. But we abandoned that very quickly in this polarized society in which we're living. We need to be unified, and we need to be honest with the American people. It's not going to be cost-free, because neither Biden, and Biden, by the way, is urging the Saudis to increase production and others to increase production. But as the gentleman knows, We far outstrip any of those nations in the production of energy and oil. China, a country that is 4 times our size, 4 times our size, is producing 25% of what we produce. America is producing a lot of energy. Did so under Obama. Did so under Obama. As the gentleman knows, energy production in the country rose during the Obama years. It rose during the Trump years, and still is at a high plateau. So the only thing I would say to my friend, the whip, we have differences on energy policy. We ought to discuss those. That's an honest difference of opinion. I want to be energy independent. I hope you heard the President talk about make it in America. And all my colleagues rose and sort of pointed at me because I've been talking about making it in America, which is producing energy as well, for a good period of time. Started the Make It in America agenda in 2010. Been talking about it every year since. We need to be energy independent, and we can use energy as an element of foreign policy and strategic policy as well, which is why the Speaker, as I said just minutes ago, as I said to you, we ought not to be buying oil from Russia, period. I yield.
Thank the gentleman. And as we talk about this energy policy difference, again, I do think it can be unifying. I do think we can get to a point where we recognize some of the impediments that are real today. While the President says make it in America, there are things that President Biden is doing that are blocking the ability for us to make it in America. And again, I've talked about some of the regulatory agencies that are making it very hard, even on some of those lands the gentleman references that could be open for production, where they can't because they've reinstated some of the things like WOTUS and some of the other regulations that were removed so that states could look at the ability to permit applications where now they're not able to do that, where banking systems through Treasury, through the SEC, are blocking financial institutions or bullying financial institutions to not allow investment by American banks into American production of energy. It's real, it's going on, it's a problem, and it's why many of those energy companies are making their billions of investments in other countries right now. But again, when you have John Kerry just the other day, the President's global warming czar, was just the other day saying he hopes Russia helps us with this. If America's strategy
Can you clarify when you say just the other day?
Probably about 4 days ago, where he was talking about trying to get energy production addressed, some other things addressed. He talked, we shouldn't have a strategy that involves Russia helping us right now or Putin helping us right now. And so don't give Vladimir Putin that leverage. He has that leverage. And while Nord Stream 2 is blocked today, Nord Stream 1, the original Nord Stream pipeline, is still operating, providing over 40% of Germany's energy. That was what President Trump was critical of Merkel about, was that why are you signing contracts that make your country more dependent on Russia? He said that verbatim. And he was right back then. Germany probably wishes they wouldn't have done it today because now they were hamstrung in the beginning of this. They're now helping, but they also are dependent on Russian oil. And we should be looking at things that we can do to not only wean ourselves off of Russian oil, but our allies around the world. And there are real specific things we can do. And there are impediments in this country today that exist that are unnecessary, that are hurting our ability to shut down Russia's ability to use energy as leverage. And they're doing it right now. They're using it not only as leverage, as a financing source. Putin still is pocketing over $700 million a day by selling oil to Europe and America. And so if there are things that we can come to an agreement on that would address it, I think it would be important that we do it as fast as possible to take away those points so that Putin has to think twice about continuing what he's doing, this barbaric genocide that's happening in Ukraine. So just saying that while it might not be something we recognize as unifying today, I think it could end up being something unifying in a short period of time if we can keep working through those differences. So I would just encourage that we try to do that. And if there's anything else on that, I'd yield, but there was one other issue I wanted to raise as well. The Senate just a few days ago passed unanimously a resolution asking to open up the Capitol again to the American people, our constituents who still are not able to come to the Capitol to visit with members of Congress, to sit in the gallery, to participate even in the State of the Union. It was a unanimous resolution in the Senate. There is a companion resolution by Congressman Style that was filed, H.Res. 961, that would do the same thing and express from the House's side what the Senate just expressed, and that is it's time to open up the Capitol to the public again. The Senate Republicans and Democrats came to an agreement to do it. I would just ask that we do the same and show the American people that the People's House is open to the people of the nation. If the Senate can come to an agreement on it, again, I don't think there's anything controversial in the resolution, but I would ask that we could bring that up as well, and I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for that question. And the answer to it is the Office of the Attending Physician and the Sergeant at Arms in both the Senate and the House are looking at that, both from a health standpoint and from a security standpoint. I think all of us agree that the American public's access to the Capitol ought to be as fulsome as possible, given constraints of health concerns and of security concerns. And so I join the gentleman in saying, and I've said to the press, as soon as we can do that responsibly, we ought to do it. And so I agree with the gentleman.
Oh, I appreciate the gentleman's consideration.
I want to add something.
And I would yield again.
That is of great concern to me. And I hope we have agreement in this House. And I hope we have agreement in the United States Senate. I have been shocked, deeply saddened, when your party passes a resolution and tells the American people that January 6th was legitimate political discourse. Mr. Whip, if we are telling people in this country that January 6th was legitimate political discourse, we're going to have great concerns about opening up this Capitol for the safety of our members, for the safety of the public who wants to visit, for the safety of our staff. And I would ask my friend, do you believe that January 6th reflected legitimate political discourse? I was shocked, astounded that a major political party in this country would tell to the American people what you saw on January 6th was legitimate political discourse. Will you please reject that concept, reject that conclusion that what they saw on January 6th had anything to do with a legitimate political discourse? Yes, I want to open up the Capitol, but I don't want to make any representation to the American people, Mr. Speaker, that what happened on January 6th bore any resemblance to what we as Americans believe is legitimate political discourse. Rightfully, Senator McConnell and your former candidate for President of the United States, Mitt Romney, rejected that out of hand. I would hope you and your party would do so on this floor and tell the American people, yes, we want to open up this Capitol, but do not delude yourself that anything you saw on January 6th bears any resemblance in any way to legitimate political discourse. I had not brought that up, but I am constrained to do so as we talk about opening up our Capitol. Tuesday night, we were in armed camp. You saw it, I saw it, we all saw it. Fence around the Capitol. Men and women with automatic weapons, both military and civilian, because of what happened on January 6th, because of the concern they had for the safety of our democracy and of the ability of the President of the United States to come and give a State of the Union address to the assembled members of the Congress of the United States and the United States Senate. That's why all that was there. And very frankly, inexplicably, your party National Committee passed a resolution, apparently overwhelmingly, that told the American people that January 6th was legitimate political discourse.
Would the gentleman yield
I will yield
on that? And first of all, I've been very clear from the very beginning. Anyone who broke into this Capitol ought to be held accountable and is being held accountable. More arrests have been made than probably all of these cities where people were burning down cities across America this summer. And that's something that ought to be addressed. And, you know, your party doesn't want to talk about that. Just want to talk about January 6th. These resolutions are not about January 6th. It's allowing the American people to exercise their First Amendment right to come and meet with their members of Congress, which they're not able to do right now. And so if you look at that resolution, the head of the RNC even came out and said that's not what they were referring to, what the gentleman just alluded to. They said they were talking about the people that weren't even in the District of Columbia on January 6th who are being targeted right now. That's what they said that they were doing. You can go take that up with them. I've been clear about what's happened to the people that broke into this Capitol, and that everybody who breaks the law to be held accountable, not just the people that broke in here on January 6th, but also the people that burned cities down over the summer of 2020 who haven't been held accountable. And that's something that angers people all over the country. They want to see the law equally carried out to people who broke the law, no matter where they were, here or in cities across America. So if you want to criticize one side of it, at least be willing to criticize the other side of it too. I surely have. I haven't heard it from your side. Be more than happy to hear the gentleman talk about people who were shooting at cops, killed cops, beat up people in streets, burned down police stations, government buildings in cities, took over cities, and haven't been held accountable. Shouldn't they also be held accountable? I say both should be held accountable. Does the gentleman agree with that? And I would yield.
Mr. Speaker, the equivalency that my friend from Louisiana tries to make between citizens, some who committed crimes, but citizens who are coming because they're seeing their children's lives taken because of the color of their skin. And what happened on January 6th to undermine our democracy, our Constitution, and our election of a President of the United States reflects the resolution the Republican National Committee passed. Legitimate political discourse. They weren't talking about the people. Nobody saw, some people saw, obviously, the president incite those people to come from where that political discourse, that discussion, it sounded like incitement to me, maybe not to you. And they came from the White House at the president's instruction, Mr. Speaker. Go down to the Capitol. Stop the steal. Give them hell. Fight like hell. Instructing the Vice President of the United States to do what the Vice President of the United States concluded was illegal and not within his power. And came into the Capitol calling for the life of the Vice President and the Speaker of this House. There is no equivalency, but they continue, Mr. Speaker, to make that equivalency, to justify what was done on January 6th. That, oh, well, everybody does it. No, they don't. It's the first time in history, history that it's happened. And for a national committee, when the Whip and I are talking about what I think we both want to do, open up this Capitol, make it more accessible, have people come in, gun-free, weapon-free, come into this Capitol, see their democracy in action. That resolution was read by the American people as, oh, it's okay. Legitimate political, there was nothing about January 6th which was legitimate political discourse, including what the President of the United States had to say. At that point in time, Donald Trump. That wasn't legitimate at all. 60 courts determined Joe Biden was elected, and he still, to this day, lies to the American people. and sadly, too many people believe in, which led to January 6th and the violence. And I'm sure that the whip believes they ought to be held accountable if they came in here and waved guns at people and killed a police officer. And I appreciate that he said that. And if he believes, as Romney believes, as McConnell believes, McConnell didn't say they were talking about the people talking in the political discourse, and should we do this, should we do that? McConnell responded to that resolution exactly as I have, understanding exactly what it meant. Inexplicable. And very frankly, if we're going to open up this Capitol, we need to have all of us tell every American we're opening the Capitol to peaceful, sure, political discussion. That's what this place is all about. That, Mr. Speaker, is what this discourse is about. Differences of opinion, how we resolve them, how we reach consensus, how we hopefully bring people together. But not by waving racist flags, not by hanging gallows in front of the Capitol. That's not how we do it. And we are all 435 of us, reject it out of hand. Not in any way try to make it look like, well, some other people did this and some other people did that, and therefore it's okay. They attacked our democracy, our Constitution, this country. They were traitors. And we ought to all reject that kind of conduct out of hand. Not try to rationalize it by some other group did this and some other group did that. People with grievances. The constitutional, it does not guarantee you being able to shoot at people, police or non-police. It doesn't justify destroying property. That's criminal activity. I agree with that 100%. And no city was burned down. A little bit of hyperbole there, Mr. Speaker. Were the things done that shouldn't have been done? Yes. Were the things that shouldn't have been done in things that happened on this Capitol? Yes. But January 6th was not analogous to any of those things. It was an attempt to undermine our democracy, our Constitution, and the election of the President of the United States by this Congress in approving what we should have no discretion one way or the other, and that is what lawfully is done in each state and send its electors here. What President Trump kept asking Mr. Pence to do was ignore the votes of the American people, ignore the lawfully elected electors and the result of their deliberations. So I say to Mr. Scalise, Mr. Scalise, my friend, he's a good man. But if, the famous quote is, if nothing is necessary for the spread of evil but that good men do nothing. And that's why I tell my friend, I was so appalled at the rhetoric of that Republican National Committee resolution. In what it says to people around this country who may have a grievance, who may be angry. And as McConnell interpreted it, the resolution was speaking to what happened on January 6th. Whether it was at the White House and incitement, whether it was at the White House and deployment, or whether it was here in execution of what was clearly a coordinated effort to prohibit the Congress from carrying out its constitutional duties, expressed and acted out. So I say to my friend in conclusion, I didn't mean to get into this today, but your question obviously spurred my feeling about this, because yes, we want to open up the Capitol. But I don't want to give any citizen the thought that the Capitol is being opened so they can come in here, threaten the lives of a vice president, threaten the lives of a speaker, threaten the lives of the minority leader or the Republican whip or any others of us. Mr. Speaker, the Republican whip is my friend. He was badly injured by a criminal who may have been deranged or whatever, but no excuse, who attacked because he was a Republican. Totally unjustified. Totally heinous in its execution. And he has shown, the whip has shown extraordinary courage, Mr. Speaker, in coming back, and I know it's been hard, it's been tough for him. And all of us admire him for the courage he's shown in coming back and condemn in the severest terms any kind of action that would have put him or any other of our members, of our staff, of the visitors to this Capitol at risk. So we're considering it. We want to open up. American people ought to have access to their Capitol. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And just again, we condemn violence of all kinds. Political violence, people that just commit violence because they want to, or they think they can get away with it, or they think somebody will bail them out if they do it. But we should do it across the board. And the punishment fits the crime. The laws are on the books. It's the prosecutors who go after people, and they are. In some instances, it should be in all instances. And so I'll continue to call it out on both sides. I would hope on the other side we hear that as well, not just when they see it in one place, but when they see it in all places. And I would hope we would open up the People's House and get the Capitol back open to the American people who want to and have a right to come and express their views on issues. They might want to send an email, they might want to make a phone call, but they also might want to go to the office and sign that logbook and try to sit down either with the member of Congress or their staff to convey their feelings. And we just hope that happens. Again, the Senate unanimously said they want that to happen. I would hope the House would do it too. And with that, I would yield.